Nobody puts resilience on a syllabus. Nobody teaches a unit called How to Actually Listen or Please Stop Apologizing for Asking Questions. And yet, somehow, students are walking out of classrooms with exactly those skills. Today we're calling them what they are, life skills in disguise. And we've got 10 of them hiding inside courses about math, biology, economics, psychology, and more. Welcome to the What and Who of EDU, the show where educators and thought leaders join us to share their strategies and their stories straight from today's classroom. Whether you're looking to boost student confidence, build belonging, navigate new teaching challenges, or figure out where AI fits in, we're here with clear, actionable ideas that you can use right away. I'm your host, Marissa Bluestone, and today we're looking for the good stuff that's hiding between the lines of the syllabus. So let's dig in. Life Skill 1. Don't just hear, listen, because not yet does not mean no. Here's a life skill no one puts on the syllabus: the difference between not yet and no. Dr. Kristen Monroe, an educational research associate, works with students navigating accommodations, advocacy, and the very human tendency to hear what we're most afraid of instead of what was actually said.
I would say effective self-advocacy, both speaking up and listening. I think that a lot of students, especially when they're asking for accommodations and maybe haven't had the best response in the past, will hear something different when they talk to a professor. If a professor says not yet or I'm not sure, it's not the same thing as saying no. And so helping the student to develop the language for that reasonable accommodation, but then on the flip side, also listening to the professor if they're able to have a direct communication with the professor, and to understand that sometimes a professor hears an accommodation and thinks, oh, I don't know how to address that.
The entire plot of pretty much every romantic comedy ever made is just two people that aren't really great at communicating or listening. Dr. Monroe is out here teaching the one skill that could have saved us those extra 2 hours of fun time. Life skill 2. Stop apologizing for asking. Our first life skill was about listening accurately. This one is about asking confidently. Because how many emails have you gotten that started with, "I'm sorry to bother you, but..." Jennifer Duncan, Associate Professor of English at Georgia State University's Perimeter College, has heard it far too many times and wants that phrase gone completely.
I hope it helps them to walk away knowing that people who really want to be smart ask questions. They ask lots of questions. I am often disturbed by the number of times students will start with an email with, "I'm sorry to ask, but..." And I want to say, why would you be sorry to ask? So getting them to ask more questions so that they understand what is expected of them, what the parameters of not just their assignment, but their life, like this experience. What are the parameters? What am I working with? Help me clarify. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Because I think when they do that, they take charge of their learning and they take ownership of the process in a way that's going to help them. It's going to be an employable skill later on when they're able to take charge of their job, to ask the questions that they need to succeed. And there's a lot less of this feeling helplessness, like I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping I've got what the professor wants, hoping I've got what my boss wants later.
Far too many students are playing a game called Guess What the Professor Wants. But learning is not a guessing game. And the students who figure that out don't just get better grades, they also get better jobs and fewer existential dread spirals at 11 p.m. Life skill 3. Make it make sense, because if you can explain it, that means you actually get it. Here's something no student expects to hear in a math course. Put that calculator down and write me a paragraph. Dr. Dan Look, the Charles A. Dana Professor of Mathematics at St. Lawrence University, figured out a long time ago that the hardest part of math isn't solving the problem. It's explaining your answer to someone who wasn't in your head when you solved it.
In disguise, communication. The overt one, obviously, is quantitative reasoning and things like that. They often get caught up in the math we're learning when the actual math isn't as important as the quantitative reasoning and logical skills they're getting from it. But to me, I think the hidden one is communication. I've turned some of my upper-level math courses into essentially writing courses. They tend to think writing and math don't get along, but what good's an idea if you can't tell anybody and don't do anything with it? And so this communication, especially of ideas that are complicated and technical, I think is really important. And that would be the hidden skill.
You can have the most elegant proof in the history of mathematics, but if you can't explain it to another human being, it stops with you. Life skill 4. Check your sources, because hearing it on TikTok is not enough. Dr. Jennifer Ripley Stickle, teaching professor and non-majors biology program director at West Virginia University, wants her students to know that just because something may sound official, that doesn't mean it's true.
So a life skill in disguise is I try to get my students to not be afraid to ask questions. I start my very first class, before they really know who I am, with a story about my mom and my husband. So this is when my husband was just my boyfriend, and he came to meet my parents over a break. And he was sitting on the couch with a laptop on his lap. And my mom freaked out, and she said, Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America, so that's how long ago we're going back. Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America said that laptops heat up and kill your sperm, so you could potentially be killing my future grandchildren. We'd been dating less than a year at this time. And so my boyfriend said at the time, how do you know this? Or how does Diane Sawyer know this? And so I tell my students, if you've ever said, how do you know, you're already a scientist. You're already asking questions. You're not taking what they said for fact. Instead, you're looking for evidence. You're looking for background information. And so that's what I want my students to get out of my class. How do you know? Ask questions, because this is really going to be important as they go on, become parents, deal with their own healthcare and healthcare issues, their own parents' healthcare and healthcare issues. They need to not be afraid to ask questions of, especially, how do you know?
To be fair to Diane Sawyer, she was citing a study. But Jennifer's then boyfriend, now husband, asked the right question. How do you know? And as it turns out, if you've ever asked that, you're already doing science. So far, we've been talking about how you listen, how you ask, how you explain, and how you push back. In other words, how you communicate. But there's a whole other set of skills hiding in the classroom, and they're about how you decide. Starting with one that shows up every time you see a number that looks too good to be true. Life skill 5. Analyze your trade-offs, because every gain has a cost. A lot of real-world choices may sound simple at first. Should you vote yes on a property tax exemption that saves you $3,000? Seems like a no-brainer. But Dr. Erica Martinez, professor of instruction at the University of South Florida, wants you to stop and ask, where does that money come from?
Economics is a discipline of how we approach decisions, how we analyze trade-offs, and the impact that those decisions will have on our individual lives, our households, on society. And we teach that through a supply and demand model. And many students forget that what they're really learning are these broader life skills. And hopefully when they go to vote and they're reading this amendment that says, should we remove property taxes in the state of Florida, that they're not quick to think, oh yeah, that means I can save $3,000, but instead they're analyzing the trade-offs. What does it mean that we lose? What in the budget is taken away because the state is not having this $3,000 in revenue from my taxes anymore? And that, I hope, is a little bit in disguise in econ, but long lasting with the students. In the ballot, it doesn't say remove property taxes and also increase sales tax. And it doesn't say that. It just says remove. So hopefully in micro, they stop and think, oh, there's a trade-off here. What is this trade-off?
What students are learning is how to ask what's behind that $3,000. And that's a life skill that shows up everywhere, from voting booths to salary negotiations to deciding whether that deal is actually a deal. But there's a catch, and that's because trade-offs assume there is a right answer somewhere out there, which is why our next skill is so very important. Life skill 6, work without the answer key, because real problems don't usually come with one. Students are used to this formula. There's a question and there's an answer. And if you study hard enough, you can find it. But Dr. Ryan Herzog, professor of economics at Gonzaga University, takes that away, because the real world does not hand you a study guide.
I think the life skill they're learning in my class particularly is, I'm going to use the word uncertainty, but I don't think that, I'm going to define it because I think it's important. Students come in very much wanting to seek an answer. We've been kind of training from K through 12, you need to find the right answer on everything. And that's how they're evaluated. In my case, right, it comes time to study for an exam. And the student's instant question is, well, are you going to post a study guide? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to post a study guide. I give them my past exams to practice, so there's no hidden exams out there, so they can do problems. I was like, you guys have the tools to build your own study guide these days. And so, no, I'm not going to give you the study guide for you to just walk through. I'm going to give you the topics. I'm going to give you my past exams. I'm going to tell you what to expect, but I'm not going to give you the problem, right? There's going to be questions you haven't seen before, because of what I want to assess is how you apply the basic tools and principles of economics to solving a problem. And if I give you, hey, this is the problem I'm asking you, well, you're going to memorize the solution. And I want to test how you think through the problem and use the tools. So what I'm looking for is, I'm going to give you a scenario, right? I love giving them a story, and I want them to identify 4 of the principles of economics from this story and what are they and why. And so I want them to be able to recognize solutions aren't linear, and there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And you need to be able to overcome and process, how do I prepare for things where I might not have everything laid out with perfect information.
Dr. Herzog's students learn to work without a map, but Dr. Starr Sinclair is dealing with a different problem. The students who have a map and trust it completely, they never once thought to check if it's confidently leading them down a dirt road and directly into someone's backyard. Life skill 7, question the answer, because skepticism can open the door to better thinking. Dr. Starr Sinclair, assistant professor of psychology at Florida Gulf Coast University, teaches skepticism as a skill, because K-12 largely trained it out of students by putting all of the points on the answer and not on the question.
I am always sprinkling in opportunities for my students to question, because what I find is that, unfortunately, I think in a lot of ways, our K through 12 education is so much about like teaching to the test, which basically is, hey, I'm teaching you to find the answer on the paper, right? Or there's one answer or whatever it is. Like it's a thing. And so what I think happens for a lot of students is when they get to college, and if they aren't put in sort of spaces where they're challenged in terms of maybe there's more than one right answer, or maybe there isn't a altogether right answer, maybe it's the best answer we have at this time. I'm definitely not trying to make contrarians, right? Argument for argument's sake. But what I do want students to have, which I think is a generally a good characteristic of a scientist, is to have some level of skepticism, right? Don't be afraid to question what's considered status quo, because science is meant to be an iterative process, right? It's the answers we have are the best answers we have given the data that we've gotten so far. Science is meant to say, okay, if we are confronted with better data, which forces us to refine our thinking, our conclusions, then that's okay. That means that science is functioning as it should. And so for students, I think it's very important for them to, yes, be able to critically think and evaluate evidence in critical ways and be analytical. When they get into the mindset of also questioning the assumptions, and then they're able to really interrogate what they're learning and thinking, and evaluate the evidence. And then they can say, okay, I evaluated sufficient evidence that, yes, I will agree with whatever this current conclusion is. It also leaves room for them to maybe ask questions that haven't been asked or ask in different ways. It also leaves room for creativity and for new ideas. And all of those things, I think, are incredibly important for the life of science, right? Throughout my courses, yes, there's opportunities where I may pose something and I'm lecturing, and, I see that everybody's nodding along, and then I'll be like, well, but what if that wasn't the case?
Dr. Sinclair isn't asking students to be contrarians. She's asking them to stay curious long enough to ask the better questions. Life Skill 8. Hold what you know loosely, because today's answer is just a draft. Consider this. We know more about outer space than we do our own ocean. So, what does that say about what we're teaching? Dr. Sarah Lehman, professor of biology and STEM outreach coordinator at the University of Mount Olive, builds that question into her class on purpose, because she doesn't want students thinking science is something that we've already figured out.
So I like to be really flexible in my courses. So to me, syllabi can be pretty rigid. You have to lay things out in black and white. And for me, I like flexibility. Like if we need more time on a certain subject, I don't want to push them to go into the next round of material if I just don't feel like they've gotten what they need to, just to kind of meet the schedule. And I know there's things that I can kind of cut elsewhere. And then being trained as a scientist, I have a natural curiosity for anything science related or questions, and just kind of going with new developments or new breakthroughs in science and kind of incorporating those. I like the flexibility. If something new is published, I like to be able to incorporate that in my class so the students can see that science is constantly evolving and changing. And even though what's written in your textbook has been printed in black and white, we're still adding onto these books all the time. Like this is brand new. So I really like to have that incorporated into my classes. Even things with new species being discovered, right? New elements, everything, just for them to know that what is in your textbook right now is constantly changing, right? We're adding on to it.
So the conclusions we're working with right now are the best ones available, until they're not. 10 years ago, there was no COVID-19, and no one had really heard of GLP-1s. The edition you studied from wasn't wrong. It was just incomplete. Life skill 9. Resilience does not mean toughing it out. There's a moment in college where everything feels like it hits at once. You've got a test coming up, 3 assignments that are due, and you still have to go to work. And what worked for you in high school just is not working anymore. Betsy Langness, the psychology department head at Jefferson Community and Technical College, reminds students what to do when things go sideways.
I think one non-academic skill that I wish, or my hope is that students can walk away with if they didn't come to college with this, is resilience. College is not about just learning content. It's about how to navigate setbacks. It is about juggling all the responsibilities that our community college students have and figuring out how to keep things going when it gets really tough. And if students practice resilience by asking for help when they need it, that is a huge one, a huge hurdle. Students do not want to ask for help. If they can learn from their mistakes and adjust their approach, they're going to do better academically, but they're also going to do better in life. So this gives students, once again, this opportunity to fail forward. And this can make a huge difference in a person's life.
But Betsy Langness doesn't just teach resilience. She's watched it happen up close.
This was a huge one for my son when he went to college. He was a honor student, above a 4.0 in high school, and he got to college and had the 3 weeks in freak out of I've got a test. I can't memorize 200 pages and I'm going to fail and then I'm going to lose my scholarships. You know, he went down the whole rabbit hole, and it's like, okay, you have to figure out who you are and how tough you are and have some resilience. And how are you going to overcome these hurdles? Because mom and dad can't do it for you anymore.
Everyone is behind. That's just college. Orientation covers where to park and get a student ID. Nobody mentions the pizza problem, the laundry situation, or what to do when week 3 hits like a wall. Betsy Langness wants you to know it's okay to ask for help.
Help!
Life skill 10. Don't panic when it gets hard. It's supposed to feel confusing. Most students arrive to college knowing exactly what learning looks like. Or at least they think they do. Study, get it right, and voila, 100%. Mary Gurley, psychology instructor at Gaston College, would like to respectfully disagree. And she does, starting on week 1.
I feel like I get these students every year at the beginning of the course who I have to basically break down. It's like boot camp or something. It's like learning does not feel like what you think it feels like. It does not feel like cramming a bunch of stuff in your brain and answering a multiple choice question right and then getting 100%. That is not learning. Learning, it's a lot like a seed. You know, a seed burst open. I like to give the example of a tomato seed in my class. And I tell my students this analogy at the beginning of the semester. It's like when a seed first opens, I mean, it's kind of like bizarre and it looks like maybe something's dying or like it doesn't look well. You know, the seed shell's kind of dying and rusting away and just gross and weird. And then like something green will pop out of there usually. And then that thing kind of like breaks away from the dead shell. And then in 70, 80 days, you can have a tomato from that situation. It doesn't look good the whole time. It doesn't feel good the whole time. And every single semester, I have students who leave my class during the research methods unit, which always falls in the beginning, very upset. I've had tears before. I've had a lot of frustration. You know, I've come back to school as an older student. This doesn't make any sense to me. And they get consoled by me and they calm down and they are willing to keep going. Because I remind them that, yes, this is hard. This is what it feels like sometimes to learn. And I'm really sorry that you've been taught differently, but not knowing what you don't know is a very important step in learning. That's when metacognition comes into me, is like, if you don't know what you don't know, I can't really help you learn. Figuring that out with students together just helping them understand that learning is going to be a little bit different in my class and it's going to feel different. And considering what their model or their definition of learning is really important.
The seed doesn't look like a tomato yet. You're confused. You're frustrated. Maybe you cried. But if you can stay in it long enough, if you don't lose the thread, then something else starts to happen. And now, the skill that sits beneath them all. Don't lose your awe. Most of what we covered today is about thinking more clearly or asking better questions. Dr. Dave Myers, one of the most widely read psychology authors in the world, wants something slightly different for his students. He wants them to be genuinely amazed by the ordinary stuff.
Something I hope students walk away with is an increased appreciation for the wonders of our humanity. I'm in a small online book group led by my colleague psychologist, Marty Seligman. And in one of our gatherings last summer, our colleague Barry Schwartz said, what I hope to communicate to students is that the deepest, most awesome wonders of life are actually embedded in the ordinary things of life. And I paused at that time and I said to Barry, that's exactly what I'm trying to communicate through my teaching and my writing. And so I want to help students pause and reflect on the jaw-dropping astonishments of things familiar and taken for granted, and how we develop from womb to tomb, and how we sense and perceive the world, and in the operation of our really amazing minds and memories and moods. So a spirit of curiosity, and especially a spirit of wonder and an appreciation for the marvels of our humanity that we normally just take for granted.
Have you ever thought about what it means to hear something? Dr. Myers has, and once he explains it, you may never take a conversation for granted again.
What's happening right now as I'm hearing you is you're taking ideas in your mind, converting them somehow in ways you don't understand into vibrations of your vocal apparatus, which are sending pulsating air molecules through space, causing pulsating air molecules at my end to strike my eardrums, which vibrate the bones of the middle ear, which cause fluid-filled waves to transit up the cochlea, which bend cochlear hair cells rather like wheat in the wind, triggering electrochemical messages up the auditory nerve to the brain, which decodes this. And so we're communicating wirelessly, mind to mind, through vibrating air molecules. Who would have thought that system up? That is one of many wonders of human existence that we just take for granted.
Wirelessly, mind to mind, through vibrating air molecules. You've been doing that your whole life and never thought twice about it. That's the thing about wonder. It's been there the whole time. Today, we talked about 10 things your syllabus never mentions, but your classroom teaches every single day. You're helping students learn to ask better questions, to listen more carefully, to look behind the number, and to know that confusion is not failure. It's how you know you're actually learning something. And maybe, every once in a while, remind them that they're having an entire conversation through vibrating air molecules with a stranger. And that's just a Tuesday. Here's the thing. More than 90% of employers say skills like critical thinking and communication matter more than a student's major. But you already knew that. What today's guests are reminding us is that you're already teaching those skills, just not always by name. So the next time someone asks you what your course is about, you can tell them the subject, but you might also mention what's hiding between the lines. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a colleague. It might be the most syllabus-adjacent thing you do all week. I'm Marissa Bluestone, and this is the What and Who of EDU. We'll see you next time.